Phoenix Splash TV. Amongst J-rock fans that I know locally here in the United States, there's always a common consensus on one subject. Whenever I ask the question, what was the first J-rock band you've ever heard of, the answer is usually Loudness. Because Loudness was the start of most people's J-rock journey, I had no choice but to take a listen to them. And there are some people in the United States who aren't even fans of J-rock, but have heard of Loudness, and even like their songs. So why is this? Well, they were the very first Japanese metal band to be signed to a major label in the United States, and the first Japanese rock band to be placed on the Billboard charts. Now, I've wanted to do this video for quite some time, but one thing that has been holding me back is the history of the band. When you talk about Loudness, you're basically talking about a bunch of different bands. That's right, the band has reinvented itself more times than most bands. Their member timeline is almost as bad as Blue Oyster Cult's. When people talk about Loudness, they usually have a favorite era within Loudness, with particular members. And some of their fans aren't aware of certain eras of their music. So how did all of this Loudness start? Well, it all started with a man named Akira Takasaki in the city of Osaka, Japan. Akira used to be in a band called Lazy. He and two other bandmates named Mutaka Higuchi and Hiroyuki Tanaka did not like the direction that particular band was going. You see, in the 1980s, Japan was really starting to get into metal and hard rock. The three bandmates were at a crossroads. Should they join the metal hard rock scene or try to be something different? Drummer Mutaka and Akira decided to join the metal movement, while Hiroyuki, the bass player, decided to go into anime soundtrack writing. That's right, the band hasn't even been named yet, and we already lost the bass player. But Hiroyuki suggested that a good friend of his take the part, and thus Matsuyoshi Yamashita became the new bass player. The band still needed a singer, so they held auditions and eventually found Minoru Nihara. Nihara would create the standard vocal style for Loudness, and the singers that followed him would replicate the vocal style. If you're a Shenmue fan, his voice might sound familiar.
You'll never meet any woman the likes of her.
Yep, that's right, he sang Joy's theme in Shenmue 2. Now with the band all lined up, they signed a deal with Nippon Columbia and released their first album titled The Birthday Eve. This album saw unexpected success. They released 2 more albums in Japan, but had a nagging itch to go to America. They moved to Europe to record their 4th album and even recorded it in 2 languages so that they could tour the album in the US. In 1985, the band got their big break by signing an international deal with Atco Records, becoming the first heavy metal Japanese band to sign an international deal. Their album, titled Thunder in the East, was recorded in the United States. And thanks to their song Crazy Nights, the album would go on to be successful. This single was aired many times on the new fascinating MTV and would allow the Japanese metal band to be placed on the Billboard album chart at rank 74. Loudness would go on to make 2 more albums in America. Loudness saw that they had ranked on the charts, and they decided to aim for a higher position. Due to this incentive, Loudness strove to write a more poppy sounding single rock as opposed to their more rooted style with the song Let It Go. Even though the rest of the album was heavy, many of their fans felt betrayed by this single and saw it as Loudness selling out. Though it did top their previous album by reaching 64 on the Billboard album chart, it would receive backlash from hardcore Loudness fans. A similar situation happened to 1OK Rock. In 1988, producer Max Norman and Loudness made a very stupid move and figuratively kicked out their trademark singer Nihara and replaced him with Mike Vesera. Norman felt that Nihara was not pulling off the English language so well, and this marked probably the lowest point of the band, because it pretty much just changed Loudness way too much. The band released 2 more albums, one of which contained old material but re-sang in Mike Vesera's voice. I know people don't like the term whitewashing, but Loudness effectively whitewashed their own vocals in their own band. This move pretty much cut off their entire Japanese fan base, and in my opinion, shrunk their diminishing American fan base even more. Loudness was losing steam fast, and once Mike Vesera realized that he was on a sinking ship, he ditched the band in the middle of a tour. Loudness quickly called up Masaki Yamada to finish the tour. Masaki had to learn all the songs in English in a very short amount of time. To make matters worse, a genre known as grunge was on its way in. The only thing keeping glam and heavy rock bands alive was their strong fan base, which Loudness just did not have anymore, and thus Loudness was silenced. Facing defeat, the band went back to Japan to start all over. At this point, bass player Yamashita had had enough of the sinking ship and decided to leave. Akira took a chance and recruited the most famous bass player of Japan, ex-Japan's bass player Taji Sawada. This move allowed Japanese eyes to be viewed on Loudness once again. Akira needed to go back to the drawing board. He decided to go back to his heavy style, which was a genre that he mastered, and ultimately took charge of the music composition. After getting Masaki Yamada, the singer that filled in during that tour, Akira was ready to make a new album, simply titled Loudness. The limited edition of the album came with a special booklet, along with some guitar picks and a t-shirt that was signed by the band. It was Akira's personal apology to the Japanese fans. The composition of the album seemed to reflect his frustrations in music composition. In the US, he was constantly being told what kinds of songs he could write and which he couldn't. In my opinion, this album is full of what I call bottled up songs. This phenomenon is something that happens with composers when they don't write in their favorite style for a long time. The composition, combined with the star power of Taji Sawada and the talented vocals of Masaki Yamada, won over Japanese fans again. Things seemed to be going well for Loudness. But within a short time, Taji Sawada decided to leave the band. Not long after, original drummer Munetaka Higuchi also left the band. The fact that Higuchi left the band meant that all of a sudden, Akira was the only original member of Loudness that was left. And this was at a time where he had to reinvent the band. And that had to be tough to lose Higuchi. But Akira still would not give up. Akira would go on to recruit Hirotsuki Hama, who was the drummer for the singer Masaki's old band. The three of them would go on to self-produce the album known as Heavy Metal Hippies. Akira would cover bass himself on this album. In order to tour, Akira recruited bass player Naoto Shibata, who would go on to stay with Loudness for quite some time. This lineup of Loudness would go on to create the more experimental albums within their discography. Critics would take note of this risky composition, which implemented many genres of music. They would also take note of Hama's new drumming style, which incorporated double bass and added an element that was never heard before in Loudness. The 1990s ended with this incarnation of Loudness, as they would tour all the way through 1999. In the year 2000, singer Yamada left the band and suggested to Akira that the fans wanted to see a reunion of the original members of Loudness. Akira decided that this is what needed to be the direction of the band now. He laid off drummer Hama and bass player Naoto and recruited Nihara, drummer Higuchi, and bass player Matsuyoshi Yamashita. The original lineup released a new album titled Spiritual Canoe. In this album, Akira took more of a collaborative approach to the music composition and allowed other members to input musical ideas. With the original lineup back in place, Loudness recaptured the hearts of their old fans. With their history in America and noteworthy songs, Loudness rose in popularity. Things were looking good for the original lineup, and they even took another stab at having some kind of impact in the US. Though the band was popular, Akira was even allowing himself to incorporate a variety of styles and composition, rather than playing it safe and sticking to his roots. Sadly, in 2006, drummer Higuchi would pass away due to liver cancer. Today, Loudness goes on strong with their new drummer, Masayuki Suzuki, while still experimenting and playing music that plays to their strengths. With the advent of the internet, the band continues to build interest. Many of the United States fans often wondered what happened to them, and with a simple Google search, they were able to be exposed to a vast library of music that they had never heard before. When it comes to being a fan of Loudness, I have to admit I did not hear all of their 26 albums. In fact, I haven't heard anything with Mike Vesera in it. But from what I've heard, I have to admit that my favorite album by them would be the self-titled album they released in 1992 called Loudness. This album did not have the original lineup. It had Taji Sawada and Masaki on the vocals. On top of what those two talented musicians brought to the album, Akira was just on fire with his composition. I have yet to fully grasp and listen to their newest albums, but based on what I heard and nostalgia, that would be the album I recommend. And I'm aware that that album is considered controversial. A lot of people have different opinions on that album. But the greatest thing about Loudness is Akira himself. He's just a really talented guitar player, and I think a lot of people don't give him the credit he deserves. I mean, just listen. So I hope you've enjoyed this look into the band known as Loudness. I have to give a shout out to Polymoly56 who suggested that I do a video on Loudness. Sorry for the long wait, but I've always wanted to do a video on them, and I always knew that their story was quite a tell. With that said, this video was hands down the most challenging spotlight to make, so if you like this video, please share it, like it, and all of that jazz. And I have a question for you. Are you new to Loudness? Do you love or do you hate their music? What are some of your favorite songs or albums from them? Leave that all in the comments below. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. This is Josh the Music Man, signing off.